Hi everybody, I thought I'd come back and make a new video in 2023 after several high watches towards the end of the year, and like everybody else, or the majority of people, after Hanukkah, I thought, wow, I need to go back um, to recalculating things, and I actually saw Dr. Barry Ozz's latest video, and I was going to do something similar to the combination of timelines that he did in that, but I was like, oh man, that's what I was thinking of doing. But instead, I thought I'd focus on one in particular, which is Artaxerxes' decree. Many of you are familiar with that, but I went back and reread Ezra, and I went back and reread chapters 8 and 9 on the in the book of Daniel, and I actually saw some stuff which I had never seen before and put together two and two until I reread it, and it just clicked at that time. So I was like, oh, let me put that together instead. And so that's what I'm going to be presenting here. Yet another possible rapture date, part 1. I'm going to have a part 2 that's going to be similar to this, but I have to work that out. But anyways, let me go ahead and go from here. So as the year 2022 was closing out, and we had Hanukkah coming, and then Hanukkah concluding, I wanted to go back and look at what were the people's thoughts at the time of Christ, prior to Christ's first visitation. And I'm not talking about the three magi that could see from the Star of Bethlehem and other astronomical signs that his birth was soon imminent, but at his first visitation and the timing of the Messiah, and what was the state of expectation from the people. And you actually find that in Luke 3 verses 15 through 16. I'm actually in this situation doing the NSB SB, and it says the people were in a state of expectation. So it says, now while the people were in a state of expectation, and they all were thinking carefully in their hearts about John, and that's John the Baptist, whether he himself was the Christ. John responded to them all, saying, as for me, I baptize you in the name of water, but he is coming who is mightier than I, and I am not fit to untie the straps of his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. So the people were wondering whether John the Baptist was in fact the Messiah. So they knew that they were in the season of Jesus' first visitation, and that they were all in a state of expectation, and were wondering in their hearts whether that was in fact the Christ. And John answered, saying, no, he wasn't, but he who is mightier than I is coming. So I would say this is a pretty good explanation of where we are in the body of Christ, that we're all in a state of expectation, but this time for the second coming of the Messiah instead. And in this situation, I'm referring to the rapture of the church and not the second coming of Christ, which will come later. So according to the prophecy, Christ came exactly on time. Not earlier, not later, but on time. So I think that you can, in fact, determine the date of Christ's visitation, and in this case, again, the rapture. I know people always say no one knows the day or the time, but it doesn't say you will never, or you will never ever know the day or the time. So, but in that case, it's referring to when heaven and earth will pass away in verse 35. And it says, but my word will by no means pass away. But everybody just refers to this one verse in Matthew 24:36. But of that day, no one knows the day or the hour, not even the angels in heaven, but my Father only. But he's referring to, if you go back one more verse, heaven and earth passing away, not the rapture, the timing of the rapture, or his second coming, which I think you can actually determine, because that's not what that verse in verse 35 is referring to, not knowing the day of Christ's second visitation. In fact, if you go back and see with Christ coming on time, you see in particular the apostles, the fishermen, which were Andrew, Peter, Simon Peter, Philip, and Nathaniel. They were actively searching for Christ's coming. So they were actively watching. So it says, Andrew says to Simon Peter the following in John 1, verses 40 to 41. One of the two heard John, and that was John the Baptist, speak, and followed him, and was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, we have found the Messiah, which is translated the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Likewise, Philip said to Nathanael the following in John 1, verses 45. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote. So they were familiar with both the law and what the prophets wrote. And it says, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So they both knew that they had indeed found the Christ during his first visitation. So like Christ's first coming, which was on time, I think we can, according to the Bible and prophecy, can know the timing of Christ's second coming, just like they did with Christ's first visitation, or Christ's second visitation, I should say. And again, I'm referring to the rapture rather than the second coming of Christ. And in Luke chapter 19, verses 41 through 44, after Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem, saying, now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even especially in this day, the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. And he goes on to say that they did not know the time of his visitation, especially the scribes and Pharisees, who were the scholars that knew the Bible and the prophecies. They did not even recognize the time of his visitation. So I said all that, including showing the Bible passages associated with the expectation of the visit of Jesus. I think that we can in fact know the timing of the rapture, in particular this season, but I think we can actually narrow it down to a specific time frame within days of the rapture. So some of you are familiar with the decrees that were put out by the Persians after the Babylonian captivity, but there were specifically 3 Persian decrees that were put out that played a role in the restoration of God's people and the restoration of the holy city, which is Jerusalem. The first one was put out by Cyrus in 538 to 537 BC, and those can be found in Ezra as well as 2 Chronicles listed here. However, there was nothing stated about the restoration of Jerusalem, but only the rebuilding of the temple. Then the second decree was put out by Darius the Great, and in this decree it was only concerned with the restoration of the temple, and again not with the city of Jerusalem. However, the third decree, which was put out by Artaxerxes in Ezra 7 verses 8 through 9, the Bible provides important prophecy and its timing. So for this third decree that was by Artaxerxes, that's mentioned in Ezra 7 verses 8 and 9, the Bible, as I said earlier, provides important prophecy as well as its timing. The Bible states that Ezra left Babylon, and this is under Persian captivity, on the first day of the first month in the 7th year of the reign of Artaxerxes. And that ends up being, if you go by the first sliver of the new moon after the equinox, and there's different calendars, I realize, for this as well, so you can debate this date, that ends up being March 26th of 457 BC. And Ezra arrives in Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month of the same year. So that ends up being, according to that same calendar, July 23rd of 457 BC. So I think the fact that the Bible provides explicit information regarding this third decree by Artaxerxes, whereas it provides little information about the prophecy and the timing of the other two decrees, I think this is just like a big flag that the Lord is giving us, that we should be looking at this particular third decree as to providing key information regarding the timing of his second visitation, that is for the rapture. So from Artaxerxes' decree, you then need to refer to Daniel chapter 8, which I'm going to go through here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just skim through it. And then Daniel chapter 9, verses 23 through the end, which I'll cover a little bit of that as well. But this is where I had my aha moment. I was like, oh, okay, as many times as I've read that. But anyways, from here, it's the vision of the ram and the goat in Daniel chapter 8. And so I'll quickly go through what's highlighted. And it says, "In a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last." So the ram is talking about the Medo-Persian Empire, which many of you know, and the one that grew up higher was the Persian Empire, as it was the more powerful of the two, of the Medes and the Persian Empire. And then later on in the vision, and it says in verse 5, part of the vision was the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And so this goat is then the Greek Empire, which came after the Medo-Persian Empire. And I would go back and read up on the various 4 empires and to understand more fully, but I think most of you already have an understanding of this. But if you don't, I would go back and read about the various empires that came up after the Babylonian Empire. And it says, "Therefore the male goat grew very great," and that was Alexander the Great. "But in its place, after his death, 4 notable ones came up towards the 4 winds of heaven." So after Alexander the Great died, 4 of his generals divided the Greek Empire, but out of one of them came the little horn. And in verse 11 it says, "And he exalted himself as high as the Prince of Hosts," and that was the little horn. "And by him the daily sacrifices were taken away." And so as you go down further in verse 13, you had, "Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, 'How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary or the temple, and the host to be trampled underfoot?'" And in verse 14, And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So Daniel wanted to understand what the prophecy was, and Gabriel the angel interprets the vision and tells him what it means. And it says in verse 17, understand, son of man, and that's Daniel, that the vision refers to the time of the end. And it says in verse 20, the ram which you saw having two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn between his eyes is the first king, which was Alexander the Great. So later on, it's divided into 4 kingdoms, and out of it will rise the little horn, which is for the time of the end. So the time of Artaxerxes' decree in 457 BC, that they add the 2,300 days or years to that time, and it comes to the year 1844 AD, or specifically July 23rd of 1844. However, this is not totally correct. So from Daniel chapter 8, we know that this vision of the 2,300 evenings and days refers to the time of the end. And as it says in verse 25, he, which is the little horn, shall even rise against the prince of princes, which is Jesus Christ, and the vision of the evenings and the mornings, which was told is true. Therefore seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. The vision is for 2,300 evenings and days, and that's years. But this refers to the Greek Empire, which the little horn rises from, and not the Medo-Persian Empire, of which Artaxerxes' decree was issued. And that was only to restore the temple and the restoration of the city of Jerusalem. However, the prophecy of the 2,300 years or evenings and days refers to the Greek Empire, and then the little horn comes from out of that empire. So from here, we need to know the time of the end, which refers to the Greek Empire, but specifically to the time period of the little horn, which comes out of the Greek Empire after Alexander the Great's death. But Alexander the Great defeated the Medo-Persian Empire in 331 BC. So the time period from Artaxerxes' decree in 457 BC, which fell under the Persian Empire, to the time of when Alexander the Great defeated the Persians in 331 BC, it was 126 years later. Therefore, from the decree on the first day of the 5th month in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, or in other words, the 23rd of July, 457 BC, you add the 2,300 years, that brings you to July 23rd, 1844 AD. Then you need to add the additional 126 years between the Persian Empire and when the Greek Empire first started. You add 126 years to that date, you end up with July 23rd, 1970. Now moving on to Daniel's 70 weeks, and this is from Daniel 9, chapter 9, verses 23 to 27, the end. You have the 62 weeks, which is 434 years until Messiah is cut off, and that's when Jesus was crucified. Then you have the 7 weeks, which is 49 years to the anointed one, a ruler, and then 1 week, which is 7 years, or Daniel's 70th week, and that is for the people who is to come. So please refer to Daniel 9, chapter 9, verses 23 to 27. And again, many of you are already familiar with this. And I know this is a bit drawn out, but I want to go through all of this so you see how I get to the rapture date. So now looking at just the 7 weeks, which is 49 years. So that's why it's divided into 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So just looking at focusing on the 7 weeks, we come to 49 additional years that are added to the previous July 23rd, 1970. You add 49 years, you come to July 23rd, 2019. And so there's still more, the gift that keeps giving. So there's the 4 years of the barren fig tree, which you also have to add to this date. So that's from July 23rd, 2019 plus 4 years. That brings you to July 23rd, 2023 of this year. And the parable of the barren fig tree can be found in Luke chapter 13, verses 6 through 9. I won't go through that here, but there's the 4 additional years based on this parable. So finally, we get to the days of Noah, but this also shows that you can use Bible prophecy to get the timing of the second visitation, and in this case again the rapture. As the days of Noah were, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So the days of Noah, at that time, the Jewish calendar used was 6 months back. And at the time of Moses, it went up 6 months. So we went from from Tishri 1 to Nisan 1, whereas now we're going back. So we need to subtract 6 months from the July 23rd, 2023 minus 6 months, and you end up with January 23rd of 2023, and that should be as the days of Noah were. So in fact, you can from all the way back to the 3rd decree by Artaxerxes mentioned in Ezra, and I believe this is why God specifically mentioned when Ezra left Babylon on the first day of the first month, and he ended up in Jerusalem, which would be the restoration of both Jerusalem and the temple on the first day of the 5th month. You can then calculate based on the prophecy in the book of Daniel, specifically in the whole of Daniel chapter 8 and Daniel chapter 9 from verses 23 through to the end, you can get to this date. And again, this date depends on the calendar used back during Ezra's time at the time of Artaxerxes' decree in 457 BC. Of course, I use the first sliver after the spring equinox, but you could use the Enoch calendar, so on and so forth. Again, it depends on the calendar, but the date will not be that far off from the January 23rd, 2023 date that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And interestingly, on Gev T's YouTube channel, he has January 25th, 1949, the first Israeli legislative election was held, and David Ben-Gurion was elected as the first prime minister of Israel. So he has on his latest video the rapture potential date of January 25th through 26th of 2023. So just a couple of days, few days off from the date that I got from calculating the date, or based on Artaxerxes' 3rd decree in the books of Daniel. So I believe that the rapture season will be between the 23rd and the 26th of January of this month, 2023. However, it can depend on which calendar you use. Again, There's the Enoch calendar that my friend Repo Man 64 uses, and there's other calendars as well. So that's why I'm saying the rapture season, but maybe more in particular these specific dates. It could be plus or minus a couple of weeks within this time frame. So, like with Jesus' first coming, he came on time, and the people were in great expectations, and the apostles actually knew, based on prophecy, about the timing of Christ's first coming, as we should know the timing of Christ's second coming, both the rapture and his second coming, which will be on time and based on prophecy, in particular based on Artaxerxes' decree that's found in Ezra and 2nd Chronicles. And so we should be able to calculate on the beginning part of it based on the calendar you use, but the rest of it is based on all of Bible prophecy, and we should be able to in fact know and the time of the rapture. Anyhow, I hope that this video has been a blessing to you. But as a good Berean, please test everything as we should. But we shall soon see once again whether it falls within this time frame of January 2023, which is coming up in the next couple of weeks. Like I said, plus or minus this time frame depending on which calendar you use. But this should be a high watch. And again, we've already had all of 2022 pass. We're now in 2023. And if you're not saved, please don't delay any further. Each passing day, and tomorrow is not promised, each passing day, we're getting closer to the time of the rapture as well as the second coming of Christ later on. So please don't delay. Please get saved and come to the Lord and repent, as we are now late in the day. We are well spent in the days and night is upon us. But anyways, I hope this video has been a blessing, and we shall soon see. I'll talk to you later. Take care.